Hey guys, welcome to the Markcast. Reed here. Really great episode today. Appreciate everyone for stopping by to check it out. Rounding down our UFL 2024 coverage, moving into the CFL. But we have one last great interview to bring you today. Longtime friend of the program, Ben Fischer, coming on. Ben had his big article last week talking about the profitability or lack thereof in the UFL in season one, TV revenue, ratings, kind of all that stuff. So we're bringing Ben Fischer on, getting his thoughts about the profitability of the UFL moving forward. How did the season perform? Did it meet standards, expectations? Ben's thoughts on, the UFL TV ratings versus NHL, MLS, kind of that whole comparison. How easy would franchising these teams be to local owners? All sorts of great stuff with Ben. If you appreciate the work that we're doing on the podcast, please like and subscribe. Give the video a thumbs up. Doesn't cost you a penny. You can also join the channel, 99 cents a month. Really appreciate that. Going to have another big giveaway here. We'll announce coming up, likely some customized jerseys, perhaps. We'll see here. Keep you guys posted on that, but get us up to 4,000 subscribers. Should have some cool items coming your way. And then our CFL coverage today, we have Darrin Bauming of Bonfire Sports coming on. The 0-3 Winnipeg Blue Bombers. What a time to be alive. Darrin coming on, talking everything CFL West Division, including the Bombers, BC Lions, Elks, all of that good stuff. And then Mike Hogan, voice of the Toronto Argonauts, coming on. We are getting his thoughts on the Argonauts. They're off to a hot start here, even sans Chad Kelly and everything. Cameron Dukes running wild, flowing hair. Really appreciate that. It's been exciting watching the Argonauts. Who would have thought? So getting full CFL coverage as well. So Ben Fischer, Darrin Bauming, Mike Hogan will be back at the end of the program. Like and subscribe. We'll see you at the end. Thanks. Well, I appreciate this. We bring on this gentleman, XFL, USFL, now UFL. We're talking Ben Fischer over at the Sports Business Journal. Ben had this big article here talking kind of the building blocks, UFL season one. We got some questions here we'll get through. Ben, general thoughts here going in. I guess general thoughts UFL before we get into anything specific.
Well, just that, we've been watching spring football leagues start and stop for a long time, and this seems to be in as good a position as any of them, at least from the curb, from 1,000 miles away. How to say it? Not being inside the organization, I don't really know what their books look like, but they seem to be as good position as any of them for a long-term survival.
When you heard, and obviously we covered the XFL and USFL, separately, and now the merge. When you heard of the merger, them coming together, did that strike you as like a merger of strengths, a merger of necessity? What did you make of just that general thought process?
I just thought I thought it was crazy they were competing against each other to begin with. I don't think it takes a business expert to understand that there hasn't been a single professional league succeed in a long time, much less two. And that while Americans love football, this is very expensive, and that it probably is the best way to go about it if you put all of your effort into a single entity. So it didn't surprise me they merged. And I think it's the classic case where like both leagues had some good markets and some good things, but neither one of them have really developed a full-fledged league. And you take the strengths of both leagues together, and that's probably your best bet going forward.
We saw a lot of shift focus here to, Fox, ABC, kind of over-the-air networks, higher, better time slots. We saw the championship game, I think 1.5. I had it around 1.4 estimated. Did the TV ratings meet or exceed your expectations for them coming in?
I think overall the season-wide average slightly exceeded my expectations. They were more than acceptable, I think, from the league's perspective. I think what most impressed me, and I thought was probably the best thing that they could talk about, was not the league-wide average or the season-wide average, but the numbers in the last week of the regular season and the postseason. The numbers generally got better. I think for people that are building a property like this, you just want to see growth from week to week. That, it's almost, if you had to choose, it's almost better to have a low average that was growing or at least didn't fall off over time than it is to necessarily have a big number that saw a decline in the viewership. So I think they're really pleased about that. And that's probably, to me, the most encouraging thing for them is that, they got people to tune in at the most important parts of the year.
We talked last time about kind of what to expect for TV ratings for these, averaging high 800s going in, like I said, over 1 million for the championship. Does that tell you casual audiences this is resonating, or is this just, okay, they're on better time slots now, so of course they're going to do better?
That's a good question. To what extent the difference between 600,000 and 800,000 is just on a network versus on a cable channel? I think that does explain most of it. But on the other hand, that doesn't entirely matter. I think from an advertising sales perspective, from a market share of the viewing audience perspective, 800,000 to 1 million is reasonably good for a brand new property. So even if that is just a function of putting on better times and better channels, I think they'll take that.
In terms of the bump that we saw this year, because a lot of it was touted, right? And that he had the Mike Mulvihills, whatever, a Fox saying, "Okay, look at this 40%." You're not going to see that again next year. Is that, I guess, how do you work that narrative next year then when you don't have that same 40% growth?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, that's the problem with all TV ratings. That's the NFL's problem, is that you have a 10% bump next year, one year. That makes it all the harder to get another growth narrative the next year. And I still think there's room to go with the UFL in terms of optimizing viewership windows. It won't be this huge, because look, when you take a game from FX or Fox Sports 2 to ABC, that's a huge bump. And you're not going to get those types of bumps next year, but there's still some stuff they can do to improve that. I think we'll get into the Friday night move, I'm sure. But no, I think you're right that next year's growth is going to have to be more organic, I think is maybe the word we're looking for. Like, is this because of an actual increase in the awareness or interest, or is it just easier to find? And right now it's hard to parse those numbers. Next year, if they're going to grow by another double-digit percentage growth number, it's going to have to be organic. So in some ways, getting to the year two is the hard part, or is the easy part. And, showing that growth next year is going to be the hard part, I think.
Yeah, talking to Fridays, because originally there was like, oh, are they adding teams? Are we doing? And then it came out, no, we're doing the 8 teams, we're rolling back. So the move to Friday is relegating some of those games to make room for racing right on Fox. Does that, I mean, now it's the shiny new toy is kind of how I look at it. How do you view that from Fox saying that they're going to move those games?
Yeah, I mean, when I first saw that news, I wondered about it. I muttered to myself a little bit because, like, well, okay, the moment you get a new motorsports property, you immediately demote UFL. Doesn't sound like you're really committed to this, but they have explained to me that maybe I'm looking at it a little bit the wrong way, that they think Friday night means more Fox Network and less FS1, and that that is a net positive. If Friday night guarantees it's going to be on the Fox broadcast network instead of a Fox cable channel, then that's worth it. And they've also pushed back on my presumption that all things being equal, Saturday and Sunday afternoons and evenings are better than Friday night for viewership. I mean, that's a long-standing presumption in my mind. But I guess in Fox's defense, they've had WWE on Friday nights for some time, and those get pretty good numbers. And I think the WWE audience is close, if not exactly, the audience they'd like to develop with the UFL. So if they believe they can get 2-3 million people for wrestling on Friday night, then maybe UFL is just right at the Fox on the Fridays. So I've come around a little bit on that from my initial perception that this was a bad sign for the league.
I'm sure you've never had that before as a reporter asking someone like, oh, no, Ben, you're just looking at this wrong. Like, we are looking at the correct way. I'm sure that's never happened.
Well, that's why I asked the question,
Yeah.
because I've been doing this for a long time, and I think I know the world, but I got to remind myself I'm a writer, not a TV media strategist. So.
I will say, last note on Fridays, as opposed to having where we had some simulcasts this year, kind of region locked. If you got rid of that, okay, we're having standalones on Friday versus 2 competing games. I guess that would be one way to spin that as well.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, if it's a standalone, in theory, I mean that does well. Even though the NFL is going backwards and doing some of their like Monday night doubleheaders where the 2 games are going on at the same time, the NFL is at a totally different level with their numbers. So, I mean, I think generally speaking, UFL fans, even if it is Friday night, which is on paper not as good a night because more people are out with dinner with their spouses or whatever, and less people watching football. If you can get those into standalone windows on broadcast networks, that's probably a net gain where the numbers are right now.
In terms of this NHL versus UFL or MLS, and obviously we just saw the Stanley Cup, big ratings, but we see that all the time. Like to me, and we've talked before on here about franchise values and all of that. Like, is that an apples to apples comparison where when you have 10 weeks of UFL versus however many weeks of NBA or NHL?
Yeah, well, I mean, your question is on the right track. That it's not totally fair to compare one of 82 NHL games to one of 10 UFL games. I think just by their nature, the NHL and MLS games are less valuable than any given football game. But from the TV people's perspective, it's a fair comp because the point of the UFL isn't to beat all sports. It's to beat what Fox and ESPN and ABC would otherwise be putting on TV on a Saturday or Sunday afternoon in the spring. And the reason the NHL comes up is because that would be something that you might traditionally think of as a classic April Saturday afternoon television option. And I think they compare favorably to that. So you're right; it's not totally apples and apples, but I think they're happy, and it makes the point that Eric Shanks and Fox have always tried to make is that we're not competing, we're not comparing ourselves to the NFL. We're comparing ourselves to what is otherwise on TV this time of year. We think we can improve our viewership and our ad revenue by putting on this.
Where do you stand in the TV revenue versus gates and getting people into the stands? Because we talk about this a lot in my view in terms of like what are we selling these franchises for down the road, but you hear this all the time. Well, the gate revenue doesn't matter. So I'm just curious your thoughts on that. If is the UFL leaning too much into being a TV only product?
Yeah. Well, I mean, as you and your listeners or viewers know, for a sophisticated mature league, the TV revenues are everything. I mean, it's a hugely disproportionate number at the NFL and the other leagues. Uh, so I understand why they start there, but I think in my story they acknowledge that they need to improve the gates. They are somewhat interconnected. We all learned during the pandemic that the TV product suffers if there's not a critical mass of people in the stands, and to some extent, the fans at a game are extras or are in the TV show. And if you overcorrect and go to and say we only care about TV, you're going to have an inferior TV product there. And I think for a league like the UFL, you have to balance both. I mean, as much as maybe in 30 years, if this is a success, the TV rights or the TV revenue will dwarf the gate revenue. Right now, you've got to have more gate revenue than you do right now, if for no other reason that you have to convince local people that it's worth the place, worth putting money into it. In the NFL right now, sure, $7 out of $10 in the NFL comes from the national TV rights. But one of the reasons the teams are so strong is that local hospital systems and local grocery stores can go to a game and like give out free samples and do sweepstakes and give away t-shirts at the game. It's both a live event business in a local city and a global broadcast opportunity. And right now UFL is somewhat successful on the broadcast side, and except for St. Louis, pretty much failing on the local event side. You really have to be both.
Just a side note, were you surprised at just how the other attendance, just how much better St. Louis was? Just nothing else really seemed to crack that mark. Are you surprised?
Not entirely, because I think with the USFL teams, there wasn't much effort put into that at all under the hub system. So, I just don't know even if your average person, even in Birmingham, well, they might know, but does your average person, if you just stopped the first 100 people on the street in San Antonio, how many of them would even know about the existence of the Bravos? So that doesn't surprise me entirely. What surprises me still, I know it's been written about, but still is how strong St. Louis is. It's really something, because I think they're right where the UFL would want. If every team could be what St. Louis is, they would be. This would be a grand slam for sure.
Except when their team is in the championship game, and then they sit at home, and then they're
well, that was unfortunate, but I
Yeah.
still think they did a decent attendance number for that championship game. Right, it just wasn't quite Battlehawks level.
Yeah, in terms of the selling off the franchises, how, this has been the goal, and it was 5 years, whatever, and now it's 7 years. Like, how realistic is that from your view? I know we did a deep dive on kind of the MLS model of that before when you were on, but, you'd have to deal with Fox and Redbird and Danny. Like, there's a lot of cooks in that. Like, how do you view that as even possible?
Well, you're right to anticipate that being difficult from a contractual financial standpoint. Like, what are you really buying? Are you diluting the current shareholders in this league? What exactly does that deal look like? I think there'd be a lot of skepticism that you could find an agreement where the price would be right. Like, what do you? So let's, for the sake of argument, let's say you want to become the owner operator of the St. Louis Battlehawks. You get X percent of the overall league with the right to operate St. Louis. What is that worth? I think right now there would be maybe a very big difference of opinion on what exactly somebody should pay for that. But there's world-class financial analysts and modelers. I think they could get to that point. That I don't mean to get too hung up on that. I think it's completely realistic to think that one day a league could become something that would be something that investors would want. I think it's important for people to remember that alternative asset investing in sports are a very appealing place right now for people with lots of money. They seem to be very stable. They seem to be growing. Everybody likes sports, and with high interest rates, it's a good place to put your money rather than just putting it into more traditional financial assets. And I think St. Louis today, there's probably people right now asking about St. Louis. I look at St. Louis, I see a team that is averaging 35,000 people. That's more than a lot of Major League Baseball teams average in the country's most popular sport. I think the other 7 markets would probably be struggling to get a serious bidder on some sort of owner operated agreement right now. But DC's not too far behind. They got a good thing going there too. But I don't think it's an unrealistic expectation. They just have to get those attendance numbers to a point that's going to look better across the league.
Well, that's where my point always goes back to, where people talk about the gate revenue. It's like, yeah, but you need to have more than 6,000 people to want to watch this product in person to make that be a sellable franchise.
Yeah, I think, and that's the main thing. And like, you're right. You don't want to be a league that depends on gate revenue. You don't want to be minor league baseball, where most of your revenue comes from ticket sales. You want to be a TV first league, but that doesn't mean you can't. That doesn't mean it's going to be a success without at least 50% of your stadium full, or whatever the number is.
So obviously the big, not news, but coming out of the article, lack of profitability in the UFL. You wrote about that. Obviously, Fox famously the 60 million loss, which could be more or less. That's what they told Forbes. Thoughts on that? Where the USFL didn't release obviously how well they did the last couple seasons. Thoughts on the UFL losing money, and what other insights you got from Fox for that?
Yeah, well, first of all, there's nothing surprising to me about that. Of course, this is a money-losing effort. It's the core original challenge of spring football, is that it's extremely expensive to execute 11-on-11 tackle football, uniquely expensive compared to any other sport. And you're just not going to make enough revenue in 1 year to cover your costs. So none of that surprises me. The name of the game, and we've said this for many years at Sports Business Journal, the successful spring football league is going to be the one that doesn't get to break even or profitable fast. It's the one that minimizes its losses in that time period before they get to that point. And 60 million, that number seems slightly high for me. Vince McMahon spent hundreds of millions on the 2020 version of it. But I think I estimated that payrolls alone in the UFL this year were going to be about 25 million that's just player payroll. That's not everything else you put into it. So, let's say you try to go bare bones and maybe operate this league for 1 year at 35 or 40 million. I don't think there's any scenario in which your revenue could come close to that. So of course they lose money in the near term. I think it's a little bit of a red herring to talk about profitability or not anyway, because the whole point of the UFL is that Fox and Redbird and Disney are invested in its success. And if you say UFL lost money, or let's say it made money, but all of their marketing and all of their lawyers are actually on Fox and Disney and Redbird's payroll, that gets real squishy on what even constitutes a profit or loss. I mean, the more appropriate way to look at this is Fox and Disney getting advertising revenue from the UFL games that sufficiently defrays their costs of helping to operate the UFL? And I think the answer right now is yes.
Yeah, because I mean that's what I was went back to with the USFL was it felt a little bit more of an upstart with Redbird going in and starting this versus USFL. Okay, let's have Fox interns kind of work on some of this stuff in the meantime. Now I think we're seeing a lot more of that full time. In terms of round out the conversation before we get out of here, talking, moving into next year, we had Daryl Johnson on the show preseason talking about, they knew this was a truncated runway to get all this going. Now, building into next year, but still kind of having the seasonality of this, where do you put that in terms of the coaches are going to be laid off here seasonally at the end of the month? We might pay them, during the summer. Like, how do you operate this business seasonally, but still needing to market full season or full year, I guess, if that makes sense.
Right. And that is the essential challenge facing the people who are deciding how they handle the UFL during the off season right now. And it goes back to the question I just answered, where I said, is the revenue the UFL creates enough to make us feel like it's worth spending money on it right now? And I think when we see things like coaches not getting paid during the off season, and we see things like, maybe talking about finding better venue deals, but on the other hand, starting to pay full-time ticket salesmen in the off season, we see signs like they will always tell us this is working out financially. The way you tell is how much they invest in it, because when I hear they are not paying coaches in the offseason, I think they are still in cost minimization standpoint. At all costs, we want to keep a product on the field for as little money as possible. So that's a bad sign. On the other hand, if they're hiring 4 or 5 people in every market to go out and sell tickets, I think they think that is the case where we are maybe getting a little bit more aggressive with their spending. And coaches don't directly make money. A ticket salesperson could pay for their own payroll spot. And right now, there are literally hundreds of places where Fox and Redbird and Disney could put money into the UFL. And every one of them right now is, can this generate enough revenue to justify the position? Ticket salespeople, they say yes, it has to. Coaches, no. If there comes a time when coaches are making 12-month salaries, then that's a sign that this is really starting to take off. I think until that point, they're still basically, we're just trying to keep this product on the field for as little money as it takes.
Last question here. How do you feel about this bullish moving on? Do you think they've learned enough over the last 3 years, or, it's been, I don't think we would ever think we would get to this position like this, but now that we're here.
Like I said at the start, I think this league is in a lot better shape than any other league we've seen come before it. I think the fact that, their 2 rights holders are also investors helps a lot on the cost minimization front. I think there's reason to be optimistic about attendance in DC and St. Louis. I think until you see like a big jump in butts and seats and kind of the lower tier markets right now, or you see some big true third party revenue generating contract. And what I mean by that is some major sponsorship deal where some true blue chip company is putting real money into a relationship with the UFL, or you see, a big increase in a paid attendance. I still think you have to consider this a little touch and go. So they haven't quite gotten there yet, but I think they're doing all the right things for sure.
Ben Fischer, Sports Business Journal. I really appreciate you making the time today. Thanks a lot for keeping us informed.
Happy to be here anytime. Thanks for having me.
Well, this is a good time in my life here. Winnipeg 0-3. Never have lived through that experience here covering the CFL. I keep posting. It's like the Meek Mills meme. Like I've prayed for times like this. Darrin Bauming here. Bonfire Sports, everything Winnipeg. What the heck? First off, how are you? And what the heck's going on with the Blue Bombers?
Yeah, I'm well. I'm doing better than the Blue Bombers. I say that obviously tongue in cheek. 0-3. Kind of strange. First time a Mike O'Shea head coach team has been 0-3. It was 2012 last time Winnipeg was 0-3 to start a season. But while I am well, and I think people here in Winnipeg are doing okay, the Bombers are doing okay as well. It's always impressive. The reason Winnipeg has been such a good football team for so long, Reed, is that nothing really phases them. They're not a bulletin board team. They're not a, hard on your sleeve, emotional type team. They're a play for your brother, play for your teammate type team. And they do not look at the past. They flush it and move on. The credo that Zach Collaros uses is snap and clear. It doesn't matter if it's an interception or a really bad loss to drop to 0-3 or whatever it is. They're just purely focused on the next play. It's very stoic. If any of your viewers out there follow, it's popular right now, the Stoic philosophy. It is purely focusing on what you can do about the future. So, 0-3 and then haven't looked good at all. The defense was really bad in week 3. Vernon Adams Jr., your boy, lightened things up for 500 yards of total offense. But the offense in Winnipeg has been pretty tepid, mediocre, below average at best.
Yeah, is it attributed, obviously, injuries coming out early in the season, obviously, players getting old? What do you attribute that to, kind of the drop-off?
Yeah, like I've been doing, different radio hits and podcast hits, that sort of thing across, all around Canada, and good to be on with you in the USA. Everyone asking that question about injuries and the age of this team and all that. It does not matter what level of football it is. Okay. Injuries should never be an excuse. If you're down your quarterback and you don't have a number 2 that can, keep the ship afloat, okay, maybe you can say that injury is an issue. Or if like all of your superstars are hurt and it's just, your supporting cast that's trying to carry the weight, I would get that. But in Winnipeg, Collaros is healthy. Brady Oliveira is healthy. Will play this week again. He missed week 2, but good to go otherwise. The offensive line is healthy and intact. Yes, they're down 2 receivers. Dalton Schoen, who, for my money, the most reliable impact receiver in the CFL today, and a huge safety valve. I shouldn't even call him a safety valve. He's Zach Collaros' go-to guy. He's on the 6-game injured list. Keurig Wheatfall, rookie, who broke out for 111 yards in his CFL debut in week 2. He's now injured. Kenny Lawler, we know how good he is. So yeah, the receiving core is banged up, but they still have Nick Dembski and they still have a lot of good players there. It shouldn't be too much of an issue, too much of an issue. It hurts. And defensively, Willie Jefferson is healthy. And yeah, the D-line is pretty nicked up, but Adam Bighill is healthy. Kyrie Wilson, who I think is one of the most underrated linebackers in the CFL, he's healthy. Brandon Alexander, their veteran safety, healthy. Dietrich Nichols back this coming week. He will play after missing last week with a shoulder issue. He's healthy. They got some young guys on that back end, but Evan Holm and, Reddick Cramdy, their dime backer, they're all healthy. It shouldn't be an excuse at the best of times. Winnipeg should not be, and nor are they. The team itself, they're not making any excuses. They know they need to be better, but for fans to say, well, they're injured, that's why they're 0-3, I think that's baloney.
Obviously, this is more CFL marathon season here in terms of whatever. Like,
Yes.
Is this, and BC had that loss. I mean, 2-1 versus 3-0. It's not like BC's undefeated here. But what do you think here? By the time we get to, September, is this all forgotten? I mean, is this enough to kind of hinder anything right now?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. It's a marathon season. And yeah, like the Riders are 3-0 and the Alouettes are 3-0 and they both look really good. And Winnipeg versus Calgary will be interesting with the Stamps looking like a pretty good team. A lot of people weren't expecting that, myself included. They're at 1-1. All of that said, this now that you've been involved in this league for a long time, Reed, is that Labor Day, that's the second season, or that's when the real season begins. That final stretch of 9 games through September and October and into November in the playoffs, that's when it really ramps up. It's kind of like the National Hockey League where teams play really hard and intense that first month of the season. Then they kind of go into cruise control and then things ramp up with the playoff races and all those sorts of things. They used to say American Thanksgiving, either you're in or you're out, and that's how it's going to be come the end of the year. That's not really the case anymore. It wasn't the case this season. in the NHL. But excuse me, for Winnipeg or even Edmonton, who I think is a lot better than their 0-3 record. I think Winnipeg is a lot better than their 0-3 record. There's no emergency. There's no panic. There is a lot of football to go. In 2011, people in Winnipeg remember this well, and I imagine your neck of the woods too. In 2011, the BC Lions started the season 0-5, and they were calling for the heads of Wally Buono and everybody. Tear it down, start over. And by the end of the year, the BC Lions were the best team in the CFL, and they won the Grey Cup against the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. They won it on home turf. Everybody was saying this is a big year, just like this year. When you host the Grey Cup, expectations are high. The Lions started 0-5. It was pure panic. And then 2 months later, they're rolling. Travis Lulay, a great defense. They were easily the best team in the CFL in 2011 after an 0-5 start. It's almost like it doesn't matter. So yeah, the beginning of the season matters. 2 points is 2 points any time of the year, but there is a lot of football still to play. 15 games for an 0-3 Blue Bombers team.
In terms of, speaking of, I'm curious your thoughts on the Lions. Obviously, this playing Winnipeg and winning. No, I mean, because we saw that last year, right? BC came in and kicked the snot out of. I mean, that was right. It was like 45-6 or whatever the heck it was. It was crazy.
Right.
But thoughts? What does BC look? Because yeah, I agree. There is a lot of pressure on them. We saw last year a tale as old as time, and them, meeting Winnipeg and the semis or whatever, and kind of getting kicked out. But how did they look? I know Vernon played well, but I don't know. To me, BC never feels as intense maybe as Winnipeg does when it comes down the stretch.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. Like, look, I think the BC Lions are built to win, and they're built to win now. Obviously, like it was just touching on, hosting the Grey Cup this year. I have watched Vernon Adams Jr. pretty closely through his, trials and tribulations and many stops with different teams in Canada. And something is different about Vernon Adams Jr. now. He just seems so confident, so composed, and so patient with the football. Paul Apolice on TSN and his YouTube channel has done a great job, chopping up VA and saying how, years ago, Vernon Adams Jr. would have tucked and run in this situation. He stays patient. He stays composed. He stays within the offense and doesn't always rely on the legs and the freelancing like he did when he was probably in high school and definitely in college, right? I think that is a big reason why BC has a higher floor than they did last season and definitely in seasons prior, because from a game-to-game basis, it's the CFL. You never know what you're going to get. You could be 0-3, 0-5 and win the Grey Cup. You could have a bad week and then a great week and have everybody in the power rankings all shook up. BC's floor is high right now because of the play of Vernon Adams Jr. The defense, I love their pass rush. The back end, very talented. To see a Canadian like Ben Hladek continue to just rack up the tackles and lead the league in defensive plays. They got a lot of really good players and a lot of really, you can see that veteran leadership beyond Vernon Adams Jr. I think BC is, for my money, the team to beat right now. Not Saskatchewan. I still think it's BC.
Yeah, I guess staying here in the West for this a second. Yeah, 3-0 Riders here, new head coach, everything else. And I remember I was listening to, I think it was Rod going into the season, and the players are going to play for him, but they might not be very good, but they're going to be motivated. But here, now obviously Trevor Harris getting nicked up in the game, and that's what we kind of talked about even preseason. But that to me, very surprising 3-0 team.
Yeah, no question. And they're playing spirited football. And, is this a honeymoon period under new head coach Corey Mace? I don't know, maybe, but maybe not. Jameer Thurman, great addition, to replace Larry Dean in the linebacking core. Roland Milligan on the back end wearing number 0. Man, that guy makes plays. He is such a lockdown defensive back and just flies all over the football field. I love watching him. Still very talented pass rush. And the offense, Trevor Harris, their run game, questions about the offensive line, as has been the case in Saskatchewan for, it seems like forever. They're playing really strong, consistent football. And I think that's all you need to do is be consistent. And yeah, a bit of a scare when Trevor Harris was nicked up this past week, but they have a bye week now. I think it was a real positive sign to see him come back, at least to the sideline, still in his gear, get in his coach's ear, like, put me in, I'm good to go. Shea Patterson, I think he's the best number 2 quarterback in the CFL right now. Was excellent in the preseason and was very good against Hamilton in relief. So, wait and see. We'll see. I am from Winnipeg. People in Winnipeg always have a critical eye on the Saskatchewan Roughriders, but I do take my job seriously. I am objective when it comes to covering the teams, but I'm still, despite the 3-0 start and looking really, really good, I'm still waiting to see how Saskatchewan is in the middle of the season and down the stretch. New head coaches, sometimes it's a flash in the pan, other times it's the real thing. We'll see what we got.
It's interesting with Shea because I watched the game on recap because we had whatever the heck I had going on. And so I was watching the highlights Monday before we did our show. And because we lived through, Shea Patterson was the number 1 pick in the USFL back in 2020, I guess it was 22, mixed results there. So I'm surprised that you're so high on Shea. We don't need to do a deep dive on Shea Patterson right now, but I don't know if that's a long-term sustainable solution there, Shea Patterson.
Well, Trevor Harris is 38, right? I do see Shea Patterson.
He's older than me. Trevor Harris is older than me. It's insane.
Yeah. So I'll just say this. This is just my opinion. I don't put too much weight on quarterback play in those new football leagues in the spring because everything is so new, right? The coaches, the infrastructure in the organization, how they build the offenses, defenses that they're facing. It's all so brand new that I think it's hard to get a real gauge of talent and execution ultimately with the QBs.
One question, we have Mike Hogan on, they're coming on as well, so we'll talk more of the East with him, but I am curious, just you're talking confidence and Vernon. To me, Cody Fajardo here, getting kicked out of Saskatchewan, down on his luck, betting on himself, but we've talked on the show, like him winning the Grey Cup, it's like, this is a new man, like the monkey is off my back, I'm able to and I see that, right? And the confidence he's playing in, and it's one of those things, like that was a life-changing moment, right? And now you never really maybe have to doubt yourself. Curious just your thoughts, because Montreal looks, runaway right now, really, really spectacular team.
I remember when Cody Fajardo was the quarterback of the Saskatchewan Roughriders and they brought in Jason Moss to be the offensive coordinator. And I was like, wow, Jason Shivers as the DC. Of course, now he's with BC, but Shivers running the DC in Saskatchewan, Cody Fajardo and Jason Moss running the offense. I'm like, okay. And this is when Cody Fajardo was coming off West Division MOP honors. I think it was 2019. I was like, look out for the Riders. They got some of the best coaches and coordinators in the league, and it did not work. And watching those games, I was curious, like, what's going on? Like, something seemed off. Cody was forced to make some throws, did not look very comfortable. Is that him? Is that the system? So I made a couple phone calls, and I was told that Jason Moss tried to maybe shoehorn Cody Fajardo's skill set into the offense that Jason Moss wanted to run. Well, exit Cody Fajardo from Saskatchewan, exit Jason Moss from Saskatchewan, and the remarriage in Montreal. And maybe it took the better part of a season, but we saw the Grey Cup and we've seen what we've seen so far this season. I think Jason Moss learned what will work with Cody Fajardo, and the confidence, I think, is a huge part of it. I think it helps when you have a coach that is a former quarterback like Jason Moss to give a guy that, has been downtrodden both externally and probably internally, through his pro football career, to let him know this is your team. We are going to do everything to help you succeed. And whether it was the Grey Cup as the catalyst or something prior to that, it does look like a new Cody Fajardo. But keep in mind, I think it's also a new Jason Moss and a new mentality offensively, why Cody Fajardo is finding that success.
Last thing here. So obviously Winnipeg with Calgary this weekend. Calgary has looked good, like you said, in my opinion. Here I'm looking back, obviously the one win against Hamilton, kind of a little duty team right now. I've out playing a little bit better, but Bo and if you have any thoughts about Hamilton, but then, keeping it close with BC in the home opener, but obviously falling short. Thoughts on Calgary? Because I thought they were looking good, but now you're 1-1 and you look at maybe who they beat, if it's less impressive, but thoughts on them going into the matchup.
Quick thought on Hamilton. I think Bo looks more comfortable than he ever has in black and gold. But they're just making too many mistakes and handing games away. Calgary, hey, week 1, I was like, wow. Okay. Because you don't know what you had in Hamilton yet. Yeah, they're 0-3, but it was week 1. And I'm like, wow, okay. Bo looks pretty good and they're moving the ball, but Calgary's defense looked sharp. I like their pass rush a lot too. Cam Judge in the middle of that defense, very, very good, very talented. But it was Jake Mayer and some really talented receivers like Clark Barnes is a Canadian, Reggie Begelton, just some of the guys that they got there. Jake Mayer, I don't know. I think he had an off season like Cody Fajardo where he just got settled. And again, his head coach, Dave Dickinson, former quarterback, maybe helped him settle in and understand like, hey, you're our guy. We're sticking with you. Huge kudos to the Calgary Stampeders for staying in the program and in the system. They look like a much better team than I gave them credit for. I had them at number 9 in my preseason power rankings, which read, by the way, I publish every single week on time, right between my ears. Don't share it with anybody. But regardless, Calgary is a good football team, and whether the 0-3 or pardon me, whether that 1-1 start, like losing to BC in week 2, what we're going to get in week 4 from them against Winnipeg. It's a home game. They're coming off a bye. Winnipeg is downtrodden right now, but I think they're also going to be very motivated to right the ship. This is all you need to know for Saturday when these two teams play. The Stamps and the Bombers have never and still do not like each other. They will always play a increased level of intensity of physical football when they go head to head. It's going to be entertaining. And really, I think it could determine a lot when it comes to the West Division. If Calgary's 2-1, or if Winnipeg is 1-3 versus 0-4, it could really shake things up in the early going here.
Well, I'm excited, Darrin. I appreciate it making time. Yeah, I'm like, because I'm living life right now, but then obviously, and you're objective anyway, but it is still, you want Winnipeg to be successful and that, it's easier to cover a, winning franchise, but I appreciate it making time. Obviously great work with Bonfire Sports and everything else. Good luck with everything.
Appreciate you a lot, man. Good to, let's do this again soon. Okay.
Okay. Thanks. Well, I think, depending on how things would have worked out with the standings and everything else, we might have been talking under different circumstances. We have Mike Hogan here with the Argos. Heck of a start here to the 2024 season. How are you doing, sir?
We're 2-0. Life is good.
Well, and there was a lot of, and I don't want to get into all the controversy preseason, but there was a lot of concerns about the quarterback and what was going to happen. If you had told me, 3 weeks into the season, going into week 4, 2-0 Argos without Chad Kelly, hey, I mean, this is pretty good. Team has looked really good. What do you make of it?
Yeah, it has. And, it's funny because internally, I don't think anybody had major concerns about Cam Dukes. The same way a year ago, internally, nobody had any concerns about Chad Kelly after McLeod Bethel-Thompson left. So maybe because Cam is an unknown quantity for the most part, or a guy who has relative inexperience, even though he had more snaps in the CFL than Chad Kelly did a year ago. So he's been fine. He's been better than fine. Hasn't thrown an interception yet, touch wood. Looks good. The running game has helped take some of the pressure off him. I mean, right now, the offense, the Argos have averaged, 37 points a game so far this year, and the defense and special teams haven't added to that. So, they've been doing a really good job offensively.
Well, that's the thing here. obviously last year and the Argos were in that blessed situation with it. Not all the games mattered as much going into the end of the year. So we did see some Cameron Dukes. Like, I mean, the guy looks awesome, looks charismatic. It seems like the guys are rallying around him. I mean, again, like I said before we recorded, rarely do I get to Saturday. I do a lot of my CFL recap watching on Mondays before Jason and I do our recaps. Rarely do I have 3 hours to sit and watch a CFL game on Saturday. I watch the Edmonton game start to finish in Toronto. It just seems like they're having a blast out there. We saw a lot of Chad Kelly last year, really kind of joyous on the sidelines, hanging with the guys, but it seems the same way with Cameron Dukes. Really seems like the team rallies around him.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's an exceptionally likable guy. You love the story because he comes from Lindsey Wilson College. Full disclosure, I had never heard of it before he came up here. And I think 99.9% of everybody watching right now is saying the same thing. But he was spectacular at the NAIA level. There's no question about that. Led a team to the national championship, MVP, like he just did everything right. Goes to the Arena League. And I honestly don't know if it was Vince Magri or who got a first look at him or if it was Murph, but he came up here and knocked everybody's socks off. He was really good. And, I don't know if everybody expected this. I don't think anybody expected no interceptions through 2 games. That's just part of the learning curve, but he's really protected the ball well, aside from one fumble against BC that ended up in his own end zone.
Well, and that was the thing. I mean, because I was the first week, a lot of eyes on BC as well coming in and what that's going to look like. Seemed like BC might have taken care of business already. That was the game I had to watch on replay, whatever. So I knew BC had lost, but like I'm watching the score come in. I'm like, man, this looks to be took care of business, right? Kind of a slow start there against BC. And then really the shootout against Edmonton. And I know Edmonton kind of has their own issues. And we've talked a lot about that with the McLeod Bethel Thompsons of, is he the answer there? Is he not, with all the money and stuff being spent? What did you make of that shootout performance? And then just curious your thoughts on McLeod, because it's not the question is he a good quarterback? My question is, could we spend $500,000 on other people and make Trey Ford a better quarterback?
Yeah, I totally get that. I'm not going to comment on another team's quarterback situation. I will speak to Mac though, and I'm a guy who loves Trey. I do Waterloo's fundraising dinner every year. Got a chance to watch him a lot in the OUA. There's nothing not to like about Trey Ford on or off the field. I'm also a big fan of McLeod Bethel Thompson, having gotten to know him here in Toronto, and what we saw in the game against Toronto from Mac was Mac being Mac. Extending plays long enough, finding the right guy on the second or third read, making throws that a lot of guys in the league can't make because of his arm strength. And what we didn't get out of Mac was that one turnover that seems to plague him and has throughout his career. He played mistake-free football. Am I surprised? Look at the receiving core they have. Nobody should be surprised. Mitchell had a huge game against the Argos. Gino Lewis is spectacular. Curly Gittins, we know all too well here in Toronto. They've got some great receivers there. And whether it's Mac or whether it's Trey, all I have to do is get the ball to the playmakers. They're going to be fine.
In terms of Toronto, I think the difference of that game was the run ability, right? We had the stats about Monday when we talked, but it was 150 to 30 or something like that in terms of yardage. Tremendous job for Coach Dinwiddie to be able to kind of tackle that. But thoughts on that and being able to kind of complement Cameron Dukes while also doing that run game, because it felt like then you really kind of had a 2-pronged attack going down the field.
Yeah, and the running backs can also catch the football, which helps Dukes a great deal. Put it this way. I know we've only played 2 games, the rest of the league 2 or 3. Montreal right now is second in the league at 95 rushing yards per game, 95. The Argos lead with over 150. I think it's 153 yards. That's a massive difference. And when you can run the ball that effectively with not 1, not 2, but 3 quarterbacks and a running back, that's going to take a lot of pressure off your passer. And, they've been able to do that with Carey, with Adeboboye, and McMahon had a nice game. He had that big 44-yard touchdown run on Saturday, which was a brilliant play design. It's a really important aspect of Dukes getting better. And then when he's got some time, one thing that I think has impressed everybody about him is if you look at him and just focus on Dukes, you can see him work through his progressions. And a lot of times he's got time from the offensive line, the respect of the running backs, where he's able to get to his third read. And I don't care if you're, D1 Power 5 or NAIA, if you get 3 chances to look for a receiver, you're going to find one that's open in pro football.
It's just odd because the CFL, and we have a lot of our listeners obviously have been watching the spring leagues or more American football, and the running back position, you have to be really good in the CFL, right? Because you with the 3 downs, and you really only have that one shot to kind of get some yardage in that. I guess just in your opinion of watching the team, just knowing how the CFL game normally is, it just felt almost abnormal this last week how much Toronto was relying on that in a good way, and I don't know if that's something they can build on, or just curious your thoughts.
Well, if you can establish the run, it makes it a lot easier for the quarterback. Conversely, if you can establish the pass, it makes it a lot easier for the running backs. The fact that the Argos rely on arguably the best offensive line in the league, it was a year ago, especially in pass protection numbers, where they gave up 19 sacks all year, and next was Winnipeg at 33. It's a really good group of athletes, and they're exploiting that. One guy who came in and played exceptionally well last game was Albert Awashe, who was with Saskatchewan for 6 years, 7 years maybe, but he comes home to Toronto. He's thrilled about being able to play at home again, and they put him in, playing some fullback, playing some tight end, a natural player at that position, as opposed to some of the guys who had played linebacker for most of their career. So I think that's another dimension that they may use a little differently as the season progresses, but it gives them another more natural player at that position. I thought he did a great job. If you're mentioning the tight end and fullback on a radio broadcast because of his blocking on multiple occasions, the guy had a pretty good game. And Ben Grant and I were doing that more than a handful of times, I think, on the broadcast on Saturday.
Like you said before, too, Kadeem Carey, right, big offseason signing coming from Calgary, really has looked good. Just thoughts on him kind of bolstering, and Jake Serezna as well coming in. I mean, there really was a couple of big signings coming into the Argonauts here going in.
Yeah, Serezna's just crazy good. But we knew that, right? Anybody who played Edmonton last year knew how good he was. And the fact that he can move inside or play outside, that's just, icing on the cookie, as it were. As far as Kadeem Carey goes, it was tough losing AJ Ouellette, but when you can replace him with a guy that led the league in rushing 2 years ago and is a different style running back than the other two. Last year, when you had Andrew Harris and Ouellette and Adeboboye, you had 3 thunder guys, right? You had that fantastic downhill runner, all 3 guys. Now you got Adeboboye, who's fantastic downhill. You get Carey, who's good between the tackles and outside, and then you get the scat back in Deontay McMahon. You got a 3-headed monster, and the Argos have really utilized that well so far this year.
I'm curious what the mentality was, because obviously playing without your starting quarterback is not the ideal way to enter a season. I guess I'm just curious, like, business as usual, we're just going through, like you've said before, a lot of faith in Cameron Dukes. I'm just curious because we didn't have a chance to talk to you preseason. Just like, what was the mentality going in, just from Dinwiddie and kind of the locker room and everybody else?
And this is the equation I think the team has used. If you have a star player at any position who gets hurt midway through the season and is on the 6-game list and has to go home and rehab, you don't talk very much about him, right? In the room, you kind of say, okay, who's the next man up? In the back of your mind, you might be thinking, when's he getting back? That's been the same way with Chad, right? Kind of out of sight, out of mind. And, we'll see what happens in the future. He may be back after 9 games. He may not be. I don't know. We have to rely on the CFL for that. But it may be different if Cam wasn't playing as well as he is. But when you're 2-0 and putting up 37 points a game, there's not that added pressure of when's Chad coming back? When's Chad coming back? Because he's been so good. So that's really taken a lot of pressure off the storyline, for lack of a better term. Because if and when Chad gets back this year, he's still part of the team and a big part of it. So it just gives the Argos a second look at quarterback if Chad ends up back here this year.
Obviously, big early season, but big matchup here this weekend. Friday with the Montreal there, and we've kind of seen what Hamilton is, right? At least thus far, and Red Blacks.
I'm sorry. As a guy who works for the Argos, you said that wrong. 0-3 Hamilton, I think, is the technical. Just saying.
Well, in week 2, I thought, hey, Bo looks pretty good. Hamilton, this might not be too bad. And then it was it kind of all fell off the rails here
It was
against
a bad
Saskatchewan.
one. I have a lot of time for a lot of Ticat fans, but that was a tough one for them. As impossible as it is to feel sorry for the Ticats, that was about as close as you could get.
Yeah, we joked that Jason Hussey had to go. He was sick, missed our stream on Monday, had to go home from work sick. I thought maybe he just didn't want to talk about the Ticats. So that might have been what it was at. But anyway, so it's big game this weekend. Montreal looks like, Cody Fajardo looks like the greatest quarterback in the history of mankind right now. We've talked a lot of okay, it's the monkey off the back, right? We've won the Grey Cup. We're playing free now. Seeing where the Red Blacks are and where Hamilton is, 0-3 Hamilton. Big matchup. Thoughts going into that, and just what are you looking for? Because this is, I think, a real first test for the 2-0 Argonauts here with Montreal looking as good as they are.
I love it that it's early. Let's see. Let's get it out of the way. I'm sure a lot of the guys, whether they want to admit it or not, had the date circled from the day the schedule came out because of the way the Eastern Final ended last year. The Argos had great success, 3-0 in the regular season against Montreal, and in the Eastern Final, the defense had great success against Montreal, and I think people forget that. Cody threw for 175 yards. Stanbeck ran for 15, and the defense sacked Cody 7 times. Yet they still blew out the Argos, which is a testament to how well their defense played. So, and special teams, they got a return touchdown as well. So it's going to be a tough game, and it should be. I'm sure Montreal had it circled as well, saying, okay, they were the beast last year in the regular season. We got them in the playoff game, and we want to show it's not a fluke. And the Argos want to show that it was a bit of a fluke. So that sets everything up nice for Friday night. Heavyweight tilt in the East. And, I don't know if these are the 2 best teams in the CFL, but I think you could make that argument pretty easily.
Yeah, I know he's at home right now, but I did hear the call. I think Chad Kelly just threw another interception against Montreal.
No.
It's crazy. I don't know.
Too soon.
But I guess what is most impressive right now with Montreal? Because like you said, the defense, hard hitting the game here. Just completely whomped the Red Blacks and the Grey Cup banner, kind of all that stuff. I guess what is the most impressive thing about Montreal right now?
We talked about Edmonton's receivers. Let's do it again. Phil Pott's been dynamite. I think everybody was maybe, when you looked at Montreal in the offseason, who do they get to replace Mac? And they don't need one guy. They're spreading the ball around. And the other thing that's impressed me is how many times they've been able to connect on deep shots. And sometimes it's not, the window's about a foot, and somehow they end up coming up with a football. And I don't know if that's going to even out over the course of the season, but if it ain't broke, don't break it, right? From Montreal's perspective, they've really done a good job with the deep stuff. And that's one thing that the Argos have to slow down, because they've given up a handful at least of pretty deep balls against them in the first couple of games. So if they can tighten up on that, maybe this is the game they do it. And we'll see how Montreal reacts if those deep balls don't start falling their way. But boy, they've been fun to watch. There's no question about that. But how long they can keep it up, I don't know. Maybe they can keep it up all season. Obviously, we hope not from Toronto's perspective, but it's a solid looking team. And I'm having fun watching the passing game right now. I hope I don't have that much fun watching it on Friday night.
Well, that's the thing. Cody is a little bit of an emotional player that way, right? I think Vernon's a little bit that way too. You're riding momentum. If things are going good, it's going good. And so, yeah, I think you just got to make Cody feel a little uncomfortable there, and hope to make a mistake and kind of capitalize on that. Anything else before we get out of here? Like I said, big game this weekend. I'm glad we could talk Argos here under good circumstances right now. Anything else from you?
Yeah, I hope more fans start showing up. A little light the first 2 games. Couple of reasons, like the weather forecast against Edmonton. They were calling for thunderstorms, intense rain, hail, locusts, flying dogs, all of that stuff. And I think that did keep the attendance down a little bit. Looks good Friday night, honoring Ricky Ray. Going to have another 3 more honorees at halftime. We'll get into that when we make the official announcement. But it's going to be a fun night at the ballpark. Payback game against Montreal. I hope people show up and start experiencing just how much fun this Argo team is.
Well, yeah. Now, Mike, if you like attendance talk, you would love our UFL podcast. So I'm just saying, if you ever wanted to come on and talk with you, no. But anyway, I appreciate it, Mike, making the time. Like I said, a good start. I like this. I like having a competitive East. And so far, I guess last question. it's been an exciting season thus far. I mean, I think both sides, right, East and West, I think a lot of intriguing storylines. How are you feeling so far? Because I think the needle's pointing pretty far up on the season.
Yeah, I thought going into this year that there were not going to be any weak sisters, for lack of a better term, right? There are 9 teams that at the beginning of the season said, "Hey, we got not only a shot at the playoffs, but I think we can make a run at this thing." Ottawa is really pumped for their turnaround. We've seen what Edmonton's done; they're a much better team. So if you consider those kind of the 2 weaker teams last year, they both improved exponentially. Although Ottawa didn't look like it in the first half against Montreal last week, but if Brown can play. And he's looked okay at times. I mean, if he can get some sort of momentum going there, they're a better team on paper. They just have to be able to translate that onto the field. And I think they will have a better season, obviously, than they did last year.
Oh, well, Mike, thanks so much. Say hi to Ben, friend of the show as well. You guys do great work and everything else. Like I said, appreciate the time, making time midweek here. So thanks a lot.
Appreciate it, pal. Anytime.
Huge special thanks as always to all the guests coming on. Really appreciate Ben, busy covering the NFL Sunday ticket trial. Lots of different stuff Ben has his fingers in right now. So appreciate Ben taking the time to come on. A rapid fire, I thought, with him getting through lots of good stuff, his thoughts on everything UFL business wise. And then, of course, CFL coverage here, Mike Hogan, Darrin Bauming, excuse me, both of them. Busy gentlemen, really appreciate that. It should be it for me today. We'll see it working on, I previewed this, I think on the Monday recap or when I was with John Lewis, really working on one of those big fish guest interviews here. We'll see if that comes up. If we get that, we'll have one episode early next week, hopefully before the 4th of July. Otherwise, next week might be a bye week. We'll see here. We're going to be traveling east of the mountains here in Washington, spending some time on the river. So we'll see how we do with that, but stay tuned. You will not miss it. If we get that, I will keep you all posted, but otherwise, Jason and I will be back. I think we will do our CFL Monday recap. It'll be my birthday on Monday, July 1st. So we'll see how that goes. And then we'll see if we get our big guest. Otherwise it might be a bye week, and then we'll be back CFL coverage again the following week. And then we'll move back into regular programming. Thank you all so much. Like and subscribe. Thanks to our guests. We'll see you next time.